Damos as boas-vindas, bienvenidos y bienvenidas, and welcome everyone to Preprints as Enablers of Scholarly Dialogue. My name is Jessica Polka. I'm Executive Director of ASAPbio, and I'm very excited to be collaborating with SciELO today on a seminar as part of their celebration of their 25th anniversary. I hope you can all see my slides. I want to remind you that this seminar is one in a part of a series. These celebrations are going to culminate at the SciELO 25 Years International Conference in September of 2020 in Sao Paulo. The meeting today is being held in accordance with the SciELO Code of Conduct, which you can visit at the URL provided. This meeting is being recorded and it's going to be available at the SciELO Network YouTube channel. And the slides are also going to be available at the seminar page on 25.scielo.org. So today we're here to talk about preprints. And as all of you know or are becoming familiar with, preprints are documents that are not peer-reviewed before being posted by the server. They are posted online and shared freely with the world while perhaps a more complicated peer review process is happening behind the scenes. And by being posted publicly, the entire scientific community can take advantage of the knowledge in the preprints, but they can also begin to work on their own ideas, use that information to develop their own science and scholarship. And importantly, preprints facilitate feedback, ideas, and discussion. At ASAPbio, we are fortunate to be able to offer our FAQ translated into Spanish, and we have some additional infographics in Spanish and Portuguese if you would like to learn more about preprints more generally. But for the purpose of our conversation today, I'll share that some of the primary benefits are that they're citable. Preprints receive a persistent identifier, and they can be cited as scholarship in subsequent publications. They're free to both post and read. They can be updated and corrected because new preprint versions can be updated and added while retaining the original versions. They're compatible with journals, and many journals accept and encourage preprints. We'll even be hearing from one today that really embraces preprints and encourages their use in open science. And preprints can also offer scoop protection. They are a public, date-stamped, citable evidence of productivity and can be used as a way to claim priority on findings. From the perspective of funders, one of whom we'll be hearing from today, preprints offer a proof of productivity. There are many funders that encourage the citation of preprints in grant applications and reports as evidence of productivity, and we list some of them here. But preprints can also really help to enhance the visibility and reach of your science or your scholarship. So in this particular study of the preprint server bioRxiv, having a preprint is associated with a higher altmetric attention score and more citations to a subsequent peer-reviewed article. But I think the most important benefit of preprints to me is that preprints can really change and revolutionize the way that scholars communicate with one another and perform peer review. Preprints promote feedback. They can spark discussion and collaboration. And as in this example here of a preprint on SciELO preprints, they can also host conversation, discussion, peer reviews, and commentary. So this example here is from a post conducted by a crowd review trial, which ASAPbio collaborated with SciELO on, in which we encouraged many different researchers to comment on a draft of the manuscript, and then we summarize these comments and posted them up on the preprint. So here is an example of how preprints can really help promote dialogue and conversation. And this dialogue is really very special because it's not just the kind of comments that might be posted on any paper after it's published. Preprints are shared earlier than the final article, or they can be shared earlier than a subsequent article version if it goes on to be published in the journal. The work is shared earlier when the feedback is more valuable. the feedback can be about the science or about the scholarship, not necessarily about whether it's suitable for a particular journal or not. And the public nature of preprint commentary and feedback can really enable broad participation rather than just the few reviewers invited by a journal who might be on the radar of the editors. Preprint enables public commentary and public conversation by virtue of the fact that it's out in the open. And I think that this benefit of preprints is really closely linked to the potential benefits of preprints for the scholarly enterprise. I want to share this quote from James Heathers, which I love. Publishing preprints sends a message I want to send. They say, I am willing to talk. They say, I want to be a participant in open culture. Let us speak. Preprints say this louder than I can say myself. So today we're going to be talking about, from the perspective of our four wonderful panelists, how to encourage participation and address bias in preprint review. We're going to talk about funder recognition of preprint review. We're going to hear a researcher's perspective on posting a preprint earlier than journal submission and how that led to collaboration. And finally, we're also going to hear about how journals can interact with preprints and preprint feedback. So before we go any further, I would love to get a sense from those of you in the audience, how do you interact with preprints? So hopefully my colleagues at SciELO will be able to launch the poll now. Please do take a moment to answer the following questions. How willing are you to read a preprint, send comments on a preprint privately to authors, post a preprint, post a review on a preprint, sign a public review, or invite people to review preprints? So I will pause here and let you all address this poll. All right, unfortunately, I'm not able to see how many people have submitted the poll, but I'm happy to, whenever the results are ready, I'll be waiting for the SciELO staff to close the poll when they deem it ready. All right, and the results are in. So hopefully you can all see what I see on my screen here, but I'll share and summarize the results just in case. So how willing are you to read a preprint? Wow, almost 50% of the respondents have already done this, which is pretty exciting. But there's also a diversity of opinions. Some people are very unlikely to read a preprint, and some don't know. So how likely are you to send comments on a preprint privately to authors? The most popular response was 42% likely to send comments on a preprint privately to authors. Only 4% have already done this. And a larger fraction of people say that they're very unlikely to do this. 1/4 of you said that you would be very unlikely to send comments on preprint privately to authors. About 50% said that they'd be likely to post a preprint, with over a quarter already having done so, and the rest split between very unlikely and don't know. 50% of people said that they'd be likely to post a review on a preprint, with 20% being unlikely to do so and 10% already having done so. 50% also said they'd be likely to sign a review, with some lower fractions agreeing that they'd be unlikely or have already done so. And again, 60% of people said that they would invite people to review preprints. So I think this is a really interesting results here, reflecting the fact that there's people saying they'd be likely to invite people to review, sign a public review, post a public review, and a lot of receptance to the idea of preprinting too. So this is really fascinating, and I think will give me and the panelists an idea of where the audience is coming from as we proceed with the rest of the speakers. So just as preprints can be a conversation, let's have a conversation today. Let's not have this be a one-way transmission of information. Please use the Q&A feature. So this is separate from the chat feature, but should appear as 2 speech bubbles on the bottom of your Zoom bar. Use the Q&A features to ask questions. You can ask them in Spanish, Portuguese, or English, and the wonderful SciELO team will translate them so that I will then read them out. So I'm very thrilled today to introduce a panel of 4 amazing speakers. Vanessa Fairhurst from PREreview, Eucidio Pimenta Arruda from Educação and Revista, Kleber Neves from the Serrapilheira Institute, and Alexandra Navarro, who's going to talk about work she performed at the Whitehead Institute. So first, I want to turn the microphone over to Vanessa Fairhurst, who will tell us about work she's doing at PREreview. Over to you, Vanessa.
Thanks very much, Jessica. Let me just share my screen. So hopefully you can see that. So yeah, thanks very much for inviting me to speak today. So my name is Vanessa Fairhurst. I'm Community Manager at PREreview. I'm going to be talking to you today about improving equity and openness in preprint peer review. So I was very excited to see the results of the poll. It's great to know that so many people would consider posting reviews on preprints and recommending preprints for reviews. And I'd just like to talk to you about what we do at PREreview and why we see this as really important and a way in which we can open up peer review practices. So first of all, just a little bit about how we define peer review generally and how we do our definitions matters. So peer review is often defined as the evaluation of work by one or more people with similar competencies as the producers of the work. And it functions as a form of self-regulation by qualified members of a profession within a relevant field. And that's a definition you can find on Wikipedia. It's a very broad definition. And some people are happy with how this process works. Some people are dubious about its effectiveness and fairness. And some of us, like us at PREreview, we want to help to change it for the better. And this is a cartoon that you may have seen before. It's often used to depict peer review. And as you can see, it's depicted here as a kind of obligatory passage to the glory of publication. It's the gauntlet that a researcher has to run unarmed. The power imbalance is obvious in the fact that the researcher does not have a weapon, while the opponents, rather than the allies, presumably the reviewers and the editors, have fairly scary looking weapons. In fact, at the very back there, the very last figure is death itself, really highlighting the publish or perish aspect of publishing and peer review. Also, everyone in the cartoon appears to belong to the same ethnicity. All seem to be white, most seem to be male, and they seem to be represented as senior in their career, although it's quite hard to tell that from the cartoon itself. This is the stereotypical representation of an expert, and it's also the identity of 70% or more of the editors in the publishing system. And as Jessica was mentioning as well, it's also a slow process. So only when the manuscript has been through various rounds of peer review and is finally accepted is the research then accessible to others to view and use. And it's also often depicted as a black box. So peer review is an opaque process over which few have control and knowledge of its mechanisms. And the opaqueness of the process is also what makes it so hard to evaluate objectively. So the data around the diversity of peer review is scarce, but there are a few studies that have looked at gender and geographical representation of peer review gatekeepers. So in this 2019 study of senior editors, reviewing editors, and peer reviewers at the journal eLife, the authors reported an overrepresentation of male gatekeepers, and over 90% of these gatekeepers were living in North America or Europe, with only just over 5% from Asia and under 2% from South America, Oceania, and Africa. In another study by McDowell and colleagues, they surveyed nearly 500 early career researchers, so who they defined as anyone engaged in research who's not recognized as an independent leader of a research group. And they found that about half of them had never engaged in independent peer review. However, several had experienced peer reviewing as co-reviewers. So this is defined as someone who has contributed ideas and/or text to a peer review report when they are not actually the invited reviewer. Although this is not always done with recognition. So the authors define the process of co-reviewing without recognition as ghostwriting. 46% of the folks who co-reviewed reported that they knew that they had not been recognized as co-reviewers, and 32% didn't know. So even if these are not comprehensive data around global peer review practices, we can deduce that who is called to be an expert, so someone with enough experience to be a peer reviewer, may be part of a homogeneous group of people, which is not at all representative of the diversity of researchers whose work has been evaluated. And it's often assumed that peer review is an objective process. However, just as everything else with science and any human endeavors, peer review is conducted by people, and it's therefore subject to influence of biases of people. And we can go even a step further and recognize that science and scientific practices have evolved in parallel with a history dominated by oppression and inequities. Science has even been used to justify many forms of oppression, on groups of people in times that are not too distant from today. So biases can include unconscious assumptions about what constitutes good research, which can be influenced by the reviewer's personal biases and experiences. Biases can also stem from historic systems of oppression, by which I mean discriminatory institutions, structures, norms, policies, and practices that are embedded into our society and are used to oppress groups of people. For example, favoring well-established researchers from certain institutions over those who are newer or from underrepresented communities. It could also include the gender of the author, ethnicity or race, primary language, writing style, and many other different examples. So for these reasons, it's important to center these issues and develop strategies to mitigate bias in every effort to improve and change scholarly communication, as a failure to do so when it will inevitably reproduce the same oppressive systems, rebranded as open. So focusing on open alone is not the answer. We also need to focus on issues of equity. So in summary, peer review is inequitable and unsustainable. The pool of reviewers is small, and it's often insufficient for the number of review requests. The composition of the reviewer pool is homogeneous in many dimensions. Most reviewers are male, mid or late career researchers who are opaquely selected as by journal editors as experts in their field. Yet most have never received any formal training in conducting constructive peer review. Reviewers often go unrecognized for their contributions, and preprints offer us a chance to open up peer review and provide greater opportunities for a greater number and diversity of reviewers. And this is where we come in at pre-review. So pre-review, we work to make open preprint peer review more equitable and sustainable for everyone. Our mission is to bring equity and transparency to scholarly peer review by supporting and empowering communities of researchers, particularly those at the early stages of their career and those who have been historically excluded, to review preprints in a process that is rewarding to them. And our work to support this mission comes under 3 pillars. So the central pillar is our open and collaborative infrastructure for participation in preprint review, alongside increasing diversity and bringing equity to peer review by providing training to early career researchers and encouraging collaborative global discussions of preprints via live stream preprint journal clubs. And we aim to increase the acknowledgement and recognition of conducting preprint peer review and sustain open practices and values. So we provide training for researchers across different career levels and areas of expertise in how to engage in manuscript peer review, centering around issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Our Open Reviewers workshop has 3 modules, the final of which includes a guided live and collaborative review of a preprint, which is then published on prereview.org with a DOI assigned via Zenodo. The learning objectives in the workshop include how to give clear and constructive, actionable feedback, to know how systems of oppression manifest in a peer review process, to know how to identify and address biases in peer review, to know how to write a manuscript review for a journal or preprint, and to know how to engage in the open peer review of preprints and to build a public profile as a reviewer. We also have resources that are openly available for download on Zenodo under a CC BY 4.0 license, and these include the Open Reviewers Toolkit, which comprises of 3 guides to help with the unbiased composition and assessment of preprint reviews. So the Bias Reflection Guide is a tool meant to help a reviewer assess their own biases and assumptions when reviewing a manuscript. We have a Reviewer Guide, which is a comprehensive step-by-step framework to guide a reviewer, particularly one with little experience, in the process of reading and evaluating a research manuscript. And there's also a review assessment rubric, which is a tool meant for anyone who's evaluating a research manuscripts review. Alongside this, and core to our mission of increasing openness and equity in scholarly peer review, we have live stream preprint journal clubs. And these allow for structured and constructive discussions, encouraging diverse methods of participation, and they're performed via a video conference tool such as Zoom. Through these events, we strive to support and empower the voices of our fellow researchers, particularly those who have been historically underrepresented in scholarship and who are at the beginning stages of their research career. And typically in our live stream journal club, we'll have 2 facilitators from our team with experience in hosting inclusive video calls, a topic expert to help guide participation through a constructive discussion. Preprint authors are welcome to join to gather live feedback on their preprint, and researchers who join from all over the world to collaborate on improving a preprint, building their network, and meeting globally renowned experts. And finally, we want to make it even easier for authors to get community feedback on their preprints on submission at a time when it matters most for them and changes can be made. And as such, PREreview and eLife are collaborating to facilitate the cultural and technological changes needed to support a more open and participatory preprint review ecosystem. We're doing this by implementing new standards for author-driven preprint review requests, integrating PREreview with preprint servers. So the core Notify protocol will allow us to provide a shared interface that connects preprint repositories, such as SciELO and bioRxiv, with preprint review services such as PREreview, Society, and Kotahi. So through this workflow, authors will be able to request feedback from PREreview with the option to identify specific communities via key areas of expertise that they request a live stream preprint journal club, and invite the community to rapidly and collaboratively review their preprint online, and also be notified when that feedback is published. A prototype of this workflow has been developed and is now available to authors publishing on open preprint systems, so OPS-based preprint servers, such as SciELO preprints. And since its launch last February, about 50% of the authors submitting to SciELO preprints opt in to receive feedback from the PREreview community members. However, there's a lot more work to be done to ensure that an equally successful number of reviews in response to the author requests happen, and this is what we're working on in future. And that's where I'm going to leave it for today, but I do have a call for you to join the PREreview community. You'd be very, very welcome. It's a very open community, and you can find some more information and find out how to contact us via the slides, which will be shared afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. So exciting to hear about all the latest developments at PREreview, and especially this high engagement from SciELO authors who are interested in receiving feedback on their preprints. I feel like I would love to ask you some questions, but we're going to move on to our next speaker. I want to remind the audience that if you have questions for Vanessa or any other speakers, to please put them in the Q&A feature. After all of the speakers have given their talks, we will have a discussion using what you deposit into the Q&A feature. So next, I would love to welcome Eucidio Pimenta Arruda. He's an editor-in-chief of the journal Educação and Revista, which is a journal focusing on scholarship of education that has implemented some innovative policies regarding preprints. Over to you, Eucidio. I'm also happy, Eucidio, if you'd like me to share your slides, just let me know.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Hello, it's a great pleasure that I share our experience with the adoption of open science in the journal Educação em Revista. I would like to thank Alex Mendonça from SciELO and Jessica Polka and our colleagues who shared with us their experience in this important event. I will talk about our experience in the journal Educação em Revista, published by Graduate Program in Education of the Faculty of Education of the Federal University of Minas Gerais in Brazil. So, please, slide 3, please. So, okay. The journal has been around since 1985 and adopted the double-blind evaluation system until 2021. And until 2020, we published most of our articles only in Portuguese. As of 2021, all articles are published in English and also in the original language, Portuguese or Spanish. We currently publish between 70 and 100 articles per year in a continuous flow process. We have 2 assessment areas under the coordination of 12 associate editors. I will talk about, a little about our history. So our discussion on the adoption of open science began in 2020 with the initiative launched by SciELO. We were throughout this discussion the first journal in the area of education available in SciELO that adopted open science in Brazil. We started an internal discussion only with the editors-in-chief to analyze whether or not this adoption would be important, especially since we had been in office for less than a year and in a process of transition of evaluation models, implementation of templates, cost reduction, and discussion about expansion of published language. Immediately, we considered that open science would be very valuable for the journal because it represents what we have been discussing for many years in the area of education, with the need to make scientific knowledge more available to society. The 3 editors-in-chief, Monica Yumi, me, Eucidio Arruda, and Susana Gomes, agreed with the model, even though they did not yet know what the next steps to implementation would be. We will divide our experience in some steps that we consider to be organizers of our work with open science. The first step was convinced all our associate editors, since they are responsible for processing the articles after the initial evaluation of the editor-in-chief. That is, we would need the adhesion of all without exception. It's very, very important. And it was a dedicated job because it messed with the culture of evaluation, a little with our need as humans to keep what was already known well and resist something unknown. But after several meetings, debates, and presentations about the benefits of this adoption, we got buy-in from all the editors. At the end of this stage, we took about 3 months. We started to second stage, which consisted of discussion what kind of review model we would adopt. So the second step is we started to talk about our ad hoc reviewers. The adoption were adopting edification of all evaluators to or keep the evaluators anonymous. Finding it's not easy in our because this is one of difficulties we were experiencing before open science, and we had a concern not to turn away the evaluators we had. When they conducted a survey with some evaluators to understand what they thought about the identification in articles, opinions, and we realized that the vast majority had fears or resistance to the identification of their opinions. It's important to highlight that we were dealing with a world culture of publication adopted many decades ago in Brazil, and then open science model is, let's say, revolutionary, radically alters many of our precepts as editors, evaluators, and authors. We then choose to adopt the single blind review model, in which only the author is identified in the review process. But as a strategy to change the culture of evaluation, we started a process to convince the evaluators that work like this. We invited the evaluators with the best opinions of approved articles to publish their opinions in our journal. This publication gives visibility to the evaluator in a way, values in his work, which is voluntary, and show the other evaluator that we can carry out evaluations that result in good products that will serve as a reference for the training of other evaluators, as well as show the authors of the journal how serious and important the work of the evaluators is. In 2023, we have already published 6 evaluation opinions in the journal. And the third stage consists in a broad modification of all of our editorial policies. From those who are journal editors, they know that is not only mean changing the text of orientation to authors, but implies very profound changes in the work of the entire team, which includes the people who work directly with the journal, the SciELO team, and other repositories, as well as evaluators and authors. In addition, it's also involved modifying our portal, reprogramming the evaluation process within the system. Our first decision was in relation to where the authors would deposit their preprint. We chose to direct everyone to use of SciELO preprint repository. This was due to a few reasons. Great ease to use, of centralization works, and orientation to authors with doubt, and better joint work with the SciELO team in the processing of article. We modified the entire work process of the journal, which included new training for our collaborators and new guidelines for authors. To help in this process, we have created several tutorials in video, text, and podcast format. All our materials we prepared in simple language with a short duration, maximum of 5 minutes, and we organized our team to interns and editors-in-chief to guide those who had questions. In addition to our tutorials, we have the support of SciELO, who send us all the didactic materials, teaching how to deposit in preprint, and in addition to guiding us in relation to the template of the magazine, a template compatible with the model of SciELO preprint. And we we believe that the outcome of this transition has been very positive for the journal. Among the main results we highlight, we started receiving the open science model in February 2021. There was a better qualification of the articles received. We observed that there was a reduction in the number of articles received because the author have a greater care in the elaboration and finalization of the works, since they will already be available for reading in preprint. And there was an initial difficulty of authors and evaluators in the transition period, but currently we have received several accolades for the process because it's more transparent and faster in scientific dissemination. The authors observe greater speed in the dissemination of the research, and the evaluators perceive a greater appreciation of their work with the publication of their opinions. This is a bit of our experience. I'm available to talk more about this process today. They can also forward message in my email available on screens. That's it. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Eucidio. This is such an interesting and fascinating talk you've just given us. Very eager to learn more in the Q&A session. And just as a reminder, please do drop any questions you have in the Q&A feature, and we'll discuss them after all the talks. Next up, I'm very excited to introduce Kleber Neves. He will be representing the funder perspective from the Serrapilheira Institute. I'm also very happy that Kleber is also a board member of ASAPbio, and so I have lots of opportunities to get to work with him. I will turn off my screen sharing and hand the microphone over to Kleber. Oh.
Hello. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. So, well, I'm here to talk a bit about the funder's perspective and all of this as I work for Institute Serrapilheira. So a little bit about the Institute for those who don't know it. Serrapilheira is a private research funder in Brazil. And the core of our science funding is to support young scientists with permanent positions in Brazil. And we fund research in fundamental research, basic research in the natural sciences and mathematics. Beyond funding the actual grant making, we actually do a training and try to do community building and activities with our grantees to keep a community and to share our values. And all of this is permeated by two values that are there since the foundation of the Institute, which are diversity and open science. So this is where I come in. I work in the science program, and I'm mostly concerned at this point with trying to engage our grantees in open science activities and thinking about how our policies are going to be in terms of open science and transparency. So since the beginning, this is what happened before. So since the beginning, we have this best practices guide for open science and reproducibility. This was actually developed for our grantees as a list of recommendations, and this was done in collaboration with an ASAPbio fellow, by coincidence, which is Olavo Amaral. And since the beginning, this document, which we give to our grantees, recommends three things: posting preprints and updating them after peer review, and cite preprints, comment on preprint. These are recommendations. These are not mandatory, but we're signaling that we care about this since the beginning. Now, most recently, there's been a shift in not only in our thinking, but in the policies that lots of funders have been adopting. So, for instance, funders in Coalition S have said explicitly last year that they are going to recognize published preprints as long as they have reviews, well, in whatever format. Like, could be a peer review, could be other formats or platforms. but they have agreed to consider those as publications whenever they need to count publications to include them somewhere. Similarly, EMBO announced that they would run a trial for their postdoctoral applications to include referred preprints as publications. In the same vein, we're doing an update of our policies to explicitly acknowledge preprints wherever we can, wherever that's appropriate. So this happens at many points in our workflow. So for instance, when we select grantees, we do selection on 5 best publications. They send us, during the application, they send us their 5 most important publications where they contributed. And we weren't opposed to it, but now we're going to explicitly recognize that preprints with reviews can be included as a publication in those 5 best. Similarly, the evaluation of our program also depends on the grantees recommending their 3 best publications, the 3 best contributions. And again, we will emphasize that preprints are included as possible publications that you can submit a preprint in this situation. We also have things that are not requirements, but that it helps in our mission in including open science as a value for our grantees, which is we have an annual survey, and then we to follow on the development of the projects of the grantees, and then we have a set of questions about open science practices, which it facilitates having a conversation later, right? Because then we can use this data on the aggregate and talk with our community of grantees about reprints, about open science, and about whether or not they're using it and whether they are engaging in these practices. And it also raises awareness, which is my point next. But and we also are changing the grant requirements. So what we had before was this, like recommendations, and now we are considering making this language more strong and making it mandatory that somehow you have to make your work open, and making explicit that preprints count as making your work open, not just open access in the other models like Gold or Diamond, but doesn't need to be a peer-reviewed publication. Just releasing a preprint that is close to what you submit to the journal, that would be enough. So this is what we're doing in terms of recognizing preprints in whatever we find appropriate in our work. And then there's this last point, which is that even if at this point we start accepting reviewed preprints or preprint reviews as scholarly contributions as part of dialogue and giving credit to it and accepting those in our formal processes, they're still very rare, right? It's too limited. So if you believe this, if you have this as a value, you got to do some work on the other side, too, just like making it less rare. So first of all, the policy changes might not have this immediate effect because people are not commonly doing such use of preprints, but it raises awareness, right? So if someone didn't know that preprint reviews existed, when your funder asks, well, have you done any preprint reviews this year? You are now aware that this exists and that maybe something you should be engaging with, or at least you're going to hear about it. And the second part is that we're planning to actively engage our grantees in the use of preprints by doing some activities with them, like inviting grantees to do public, much like Vanessa suggested, to do like a live stream journal club, and or to do a crowd review and then publish those as public commentary on preprints, or organize a crowd peer review event. So we are planning some activities in those modes so that we can make publicity about preprints and about open science in general. So this is pretty much what I wanted to share about actions that we, particularly in SciELO, are thinking and coming up to help with this whole recognizing preprints as part of the dialogue and recognizing not only preprints but also preprint reviews as scholarly contributions that they are. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kleber. Really fascinating to hear the funder perspective. We've also now heard the journal perspective, and also following some background on kind of the overarching themes of how to make peer review more inclusive. And now I'd like to shift gears once more to hear from a researcher perspective. So it's my pleasure to introduce Alexandra Navarro, who's going to tell us about some amazing work that she did during her work at the Whitehead Institute. Over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Jessica. Let me just share my screen really quick. That's not the right one. My apologies. Here. Oh no. Oh wait. Are you seeing my slides? Sorry.
I'm not, no. Would you like me to let me know? Yeah, if you need any. That looks great. Looks good. I can see them now.
Okay. I apologize. Great. Well, hello, everyone. As Jessica mentioned, my name is Alexandra, and what I'm going to talk to you about today is some of the work I did during my PhD, where I took advantage of this concept of publishing in progress utilizing preprints. And so I'm going to start by giving a little context on what that project was and what the science was that I was working on. Just to give sort of some insight on why this project in particular really lent itself to this process. Then I'll sort of go through what the process looked like on my end, and then some kind of reflections I have after going through this. So to start off with the science. So the laboratory that I worked in for my PhD focused a lot on studying chromosomes and how it is that the genetic material is equally split between two cells during every cell division. And more specifically, we cared a lot about the proteins that live in this red circle here called the kinetochore. And so throughout my PhD, I studied many of the proteins that sort of make up this protein complex. But for today's story, I'm going to focus on one specific protein called SEMPR. And so for reasons that are sort of outside of the scope of this talk, I was really interested in studying how this protein is expressed and what its function is within the kinetochore. And so while I was doing this and I was studying the SEMPR mRNA, which is where the protein itself is sequenced and produced, I found that where the canonical protein, which I'll refer to in this talk as SEMPR long, this is the protein that most people study, is expressed from this transcript. I actually found that this shorter protein was also expressed utilizing a different sequence than this long protein. And for the purpose of this talk, I'll refer to this short peptide as SEMPR short. And so because in my lab, we're all cell biologists, what we care about is once we make a discovery, we want to see what does it do, where does it go? So we took these two protein sequences and essentially applied a fluorescent protein tag, which would essentially allow us to express these constructs in cells and see whether or not this small protein behaves similar to the long one or not. And I'm going to show you that data here. So what we're looking at here are images of single cells in two different cell cycle stages. So in this panel, we're looking at the DNA. And these dots here represent the localization of this SEMPR long protein. And because my lab studied these kinetochore protein complexes, which I had mentioned before, we visualized them in comparison to show that the SEMPR long protein does in fact behave the way that we expected it to behave. However, when we expressed this SEMPR short protein in cells in a similar way to the long protein, we found something really striking. And that's that it had this very distinct localization. So again, here we're looking at DNA. This is the localization behavior of the SEMPR short protein as compared to what we're used to looking at, which are kinetochores. And so this was really surprising to us because this protein is actually incredibly short. It's only 37 amino acids. And what we were initially really interested in was the capability of this shorter protein to be used to visualize things in the cell. So because my lab does this very often, we basically looked at cells live. So what you're looking at here are different snapshots of a cell going through cell division. And what we saw is that when we express the small protein, it basically makes these structures throughout the cell cycle. So this was really intriguing to us. And the first question was, where is the small protein going? And so again, we used our toolkit, being a cell biology lab, and compared where this short protein went and related that to two other structures that we know localized to a similar area within the cell. And so that's one location in the cell called the endoplasmic reticulum and the Golgi apparatus. And so again, in this first panel, you're looking at DNA. The second is showing us the localization of our newly discovered short protein. And then here in this last panel, we're looking at these structures within the cell. And so our approach was really to say, if we compare the localization of the short protein to the marker, do they look similar? And so what we were really surprised to see is that where the long protein makes these small foci in the nuclei, this short protein actually localizes to this structure called the Golgi apparatus. And so that was really interesting to us, but this is basically where we landed. We realized that this small protein had this very surprising localization to a part of the cell that our lab does not study quite often. And so this kind of lied outside of the expertise of our group. So this was the foundation for our idea, which was, what if we write up this observation and seek input from as large a pool of scientists as possible in the hopes of getting constructive feedback? And the feedback we were looking for was really broad. So just to go over this, so our approach for this is that I wrote up my observations, I wrote up how I made this discovery, talked about, my approaches, showed data, and we essentially put together these early observations in the structure of what a journal article would look like. So we wanted to make sure that it was easy to read for whoever stumbled upon our preprint in progress. And when writing this document, we were very explicit about it being a work in progress. Within our intro and our discussion, we literally explicitly said, we're very early on in this discovery, and we're looking for feedback from people who read this to see what was interesting. And one of the things we were really interested in finding was, what do people find this interesting? And for people who do study that structure in the cell, the Golgi, what questions pop up to them? Just in case we didn't have some of the same questions, or if there was something that maybe we don't know about, given that this slide outside the expertise of our lab. And so the third component, which was really big, is we had to figure out what forum would we use in order to do this. And so this was back in 2020, and our initial thought was to resort to Twitter, mostly because my PI was pretty active on this and had kind of cultured this really engaged group of, other scientific followers. And so that led to our initial post, where we welcomed everyone to this concept of a preprint in progress and welcomed diverse feedback from everyone. So we posted this and then kind of waited, hoping, that we'd hear from people. And the posting of the first article was actually a great success, which was really exciting for us. And what was really exciting is that we received really a diverse array of feedback. And I want to highlight that this feedback really is different from what you would expect from like a peer review process. Say if we had kind of, expanded on this work ourselves and submitted it or talked to one person, it really allowed us to get people who, were reading this out of interest of this concept of a preprint in progress, but also from people who have more familiarity with how it is that proteins get to certain structures in the cell. And so we were first really excited to see that other people also found this finding really interesting. And we received critical feedback and suggestions that really led us down two paths. So one, we realized that a lot of people were really interested in the mechanism of localization, given how short this protein was and how distinct its localization is, and the fact that it is so robustly localized to this structure. And the second part of this is that we had people who were greater experts in genomics and evolution become really interested in this idea of this small peptide being expressed upstream of what the normal longer protein is expressed from. And so both of these forms of feedback and these pools of suggestions really guided how it is that we developed this project. And I do want to say now that this project was, a side project for me. This was something that was really kind of rooted out of interest and wanting to kind of pursue this really serendipitous discovery. And so it was so helpful to have these other pair of eyes, you know, not only kind of highlight, like, of all the things we could pursue, these are the things that people are most interested and find most interesting, but then also to get their expertise in telling us what is the best way to actually approach these potential directions for this project. And so to kind of give you a broader overview, so again, I went over how we posted this first preprint. I took those suggestions and applied that to the project. And then I updated that preprint as well. And I ended up doing this 2 times. So basically like total 3-time cycle of, you know, posting a preprint in progress with updated data, getting feedback. And each time it really helped us to push things forward. It gave us an idea of, you know, how satisfied are people by the approach we took, or, you know, what additional questions are there? A lot of people also reached out with like suggestions on tools that we could potentially use, which was really, really helpful. And so I'm going to kind of highlight this, but, you know, the nitty-gritty details of the science is not as important. But one of the key things that allowed us to do is actually realize that there was this 10 amino acid. So of this, you know, already short protein, we were able to shorten it even further. And this was really done through getting feedback from people's expertise and what's required for a protein to get to a structure like the Golgi, but also people's expertise in studying the evolution of this sequence, which allowed us to kind of do really targeted mutagenesis to get down to this really interesting discovery. And secondly, they allowed us to test mechanisms, which is something that we could potentially have gotten to, but that process of kind of understanding and having targeted hypotheses about what mechanisms could be involved was really helped by getting this feedback from people as well. And it's just kind of a summary of what that data kind of looked like. And so following this, we pursued publication. After getting all of this feedback. And when we pursued publication, it did still go through, you know, the revision process, but a lot of things that kind of came up in the revision process, we were expecting and sort of knew, and we're well equipped to do, given that we had, you know, people to reach out to as well. So just a reflection on the process. So overall, I would say that my experience was really positive. I think I was really, you know, grateful and surprised by all the feedback that we did get and the engagement that we got. And I think what was really nice, and it kind of reflects back to a quote that Jessica brought up in her introduction, and that's that it really did make me feel like how big and broad the scientific community is. And it's just so fun, you know, to be able to engage with a lot of people, where I'm, you know, here in Boston, Massachusetts, at like this one institute, but I was able to, you know, interact with or discuss this with people who were, you know, in really diverse places that I may not have gotten to know, given that they are also lied outside of my field of study. So just some general pros. It really helped me to cast a broad net and receive a lot of feedback at once versus, you know, going to individuals and kind of talking, even though that is also really helpful. Yeah, so as I mentioned, it opens up the discussion for findings to a larger audience, and you get a really nice kind of sampling of what people are interested in the project. And to be honest, it also really helped in writing my findings up really early, so that it helps us to kind of think of, like, you know, what questions actually come out from this work. And it helped me to really focus like where this project went and where the direction was, given that it wasn't kind of my main project when I was in my graduate lab. And then on the contrary, some things to consider. I think that there is a discussion to be had about, you know, what projects lend themselves to this process. And with the second point, I think it's important that, I think for us, what was really beneficial is that we kind of had no idea where this would go. And so, you know, it was nice that we were able to leave room for a lot of like interpretations of the findings that were had, where sometimes, you know, we'd see something, but then getting someone else's perspective on it or feedback was really, really helpful in thinking about what were the follow-ups. And I think the last point really comes up now, you know, which is that I think there's also really good discussion to be had about what mediums are the best to foster this kind of discussion. I think for us, you know, like the use of social media was really helpful in that it allowed us to get that kind of immediate feedback. But that was after, having this network where it did concentrate, who saw this preprint in progress to be other scientists. And so I think that's something that's kind of something to think about, and also, kind of to discuss as well. Yeah, and with that, just, thank you to the organizers for letting me kind of share my story, and obviously to my lab mates and the lab and my PI that kind of helped promote this as well. And I'm happy, to be part of the discussion after this.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. I love hearing that story, and so cool to see the examples of the specific feedback that you received on Twitter. And I think you raised some really important points. What mechanisms are we going to use to collect this feedback, and in what cases can it be most useful? So now we have about 30 minutes left in our allotted time for this event that we will now devote to Q&A. So please do feel free, if you have any questions, to use the Q&A box at the bottom to ask them. You can ask your questions in Spanish, Portuguese, or English, and the SciELO staff will kindly translate them. So I want to ask a question that first for Vanessa from Luciano Panapucci. Could you talk a little bit more about what Notify is and how it works? And maybe to elaborate on this just a tiny bit, like what kind of problems does it solve, and why do we need Notify?
Sure. So Notify is developed by CORE, who are the Confederation of Open Access Repositories. So they're developing this Notify initiative to develop a kind of common protocol that they refer to as the technical glue, which will enable widespread interoperability across different repositories and other services such as PREreview. So it's not dedicated just for PREreview, but we really want to integrate this into our workflow. And the problem that it solves is that people would be able to, you would have a preprint author who would be able to come along, and at the point of publishing in their repository, they would be able to select quite easily that they would like feedback from the PREreview community. And then this would then send a notification to the PREreview community that this preprint this author would like community review on their preprint. And it would then send a notification to members of the PREreview community. You could select whether, and this is something we'll have in place in future, and we don't just yet, but when we have a community section back on our site, you could select a specific community if you wanted to get feedback on a specific topic or from a specific group of people. So the idea is to just help simplify the process for authors to get feedback quickly, and to help people to be notified if there's a preprint that's of interest for them that they might want to review. So it's something we're very excited to implement, and then we're working on it at the moment, so hopefully it'll be there in the near future.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. All of these considerations about technology, infrastructure, and process, I think, are really important in supporting the kind of changes that we are interested in seeing. I have another process question, this one from Eucidio. For Eucidio, in the cases where you publish the reviews as articles in the journal, how do you handle them? Do they also undergo some kind of review? And how would you deal with a biased review?
Thanks for the excellent question. The text of the review is written by all the evaluators, which already requires a collective work of people who don't know each other. After sending the text, it's reviewed by the associate editor of the area and by the chief editors. We are in the process of analysis. We are in the process of analyzing this publication model and have been carrying out an ongoing internal analysis, but with the participation of the associate editors, in order to define the revisions that may be published in the journal. Let's say that on the one hand, we still don't have demand from evaluators for this publication. And in the other hand, we are able to take the necessary care with bias reviews.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. This next question is for Kleber, Neves. Daniela Leipsch, I apologize in advance if I mispronounce anyone's name, which I am certainly doing and will do. Do you have any restrictions when considering reviewed preprints and applications with regard to the reviews? So for example, is a review by pre-review sufficient? Or do you need more than one review? Or should the review be in certain venues? And do you have any guidelines for the evaluators? I think this would mean just my interpretation, the reviewers who are reviewing materials from the scientists. Do you have any guidelines for evaluators and how to consider those preprints or other articles in evaluation?
So, well, thank you for the question. And well, we don't have the guidelines. This is all in development. So we don't have the guidelines, but I can tell you a bit of what's been guiding our thoughts so far. And well, guidelines for reviewers will make explicit that we take those as equivalent, so that they shouldn't take preprints for granted or give them less value because they are preprints, right? They should be judged on the quality of the work reported. And on the other part of the question, we don't have the policy yet, so we might even go the way of accepting even preprints without any review, just the preprint, trusting that the researcher is putting forward their best work. Of course, they are applicants in the selection, and of course they won't shoot their own foot by submitting to like a bad preprint that's still in progress, or the incentive is not there for them to submit some work that they don't care about. That said, I live with a more philosophical thought that even one single review on open review on pre-review is more material and more open than most journals give us at this point. So that's, between having just a label that this paper has been reviewed, but I don't know by who, by how many people, and I don't know what they said, and having one single review, that's more material that evaluators can actually consider in their evaluation, right? It's not that they know that the preprint is reviewed, that the review is there, so they can actually incorporate that in their judgment.
Yeah, fantastic point. I think there's maybe a little bit of a lack of transparency in the rest of the research system, and I think maybe this leads into another question for Eucidio. Can authors opt out of having their reviews published, or is it mandatory? And is the identification of reviewers optional or mandatory? And which parts of the process is it possible, I believe, to identify or de-identify the reviewers? And this question comes from Luciano.
Okay, thanks for question. The identification of reviewers is optional. And as I said, we are in a stage of analysis regarding the identification based on the review publications. As part of this evaluation stage, we have only published reviews of approved articles, and we seek the best reviews as a way of reducing possible constraint that could occur. So far, the feedback is very positive. Reviews, like they are published reviews, and authors have approved the reviews received.
Thank you so much. So this seems to be a very positive experience for everyone based upon the fact that you're really highlighting these kind of constructive and positive reports. I want to combine two questions for Alexandra. The first from Daniela is, how do you get so much feedback, or what would you recommend to authors as a strategy who might not have a large network of people on Twitter? And Luciano has also asked, from which channel, Twitter versus comments versus the preprint itself, did you get the most feedback? So I guess a question of, in your case with Ian's large Twitter network, where did that feedback come from, and what would you recommend to authors who might have a different way of being in contact with their network?
Yeah, those are great questions. So for the first one, I will say most of our feedback did come from like Twitter comments, and actually some people after, finding the preprint in that way also like emailed me and reached out in that way. So those were the primary ways that I received feedback. for the second question, I've thought about this a lot actually too, because I think an analogy I like to think of in my mind is that this kind of preprint in progress very much feels kind of like a poster presentation, you know, but instead of being, you know, at one conference, you're kind of posting this for a lot of people to see. And so I think with that, like, I definitely think a lot of the initiatives, you know, that Vanessa has talked about, where you can have these kind of groups to like peer review, and if there's kind of a way to do that. But also I think, like, you know, if you are at a conference or something, kind of like discussing things in that way, I think those are like the main ones that I can think of now, because I think it's like, or even, you know, if moving forward, you know, as people are more open to posting comments on preprints, kind of even coming up with forums in some way, I can imagine, you know, where like even like at association meetings or something, you know, where there are forums people can discuss that can be posted based on field or something. I think like if people were able to find them easily too, I feel like people are very willing, you know, to give comments on that. So yeah.
That's such a great point. I think it's such a natural way to extend kind of the utility of scientific meetings and make them a bit more accessible. Okay, great. So I want to go back to Eucidio for one more question, again from Luciano. What's the percentage of submissions from Brazil and internationally? Did you notice any differences in regards to the origin of contributions before and after the change?
That's an interesting question, because we thought we would receive more international articles, but actually the most are from Brazil. We did a lot of internal and external research and realized that international authors find use more easily in international journal databases. Despite the preprint being an international initiative, our main databases are still in Portuguese as the first language. That's why we try to pull all articles in English language, and now Scopus and Web of Science are evaluating our public application for entry in their databases.
Thank you. And one more follow-up to Eucidio, again from Luciano. It isn't clear who decides to publish or not the acceptance report review. So I wonder if you could just clarify a little bit more about who makes the decisions in this process. So who decides to publish the review? I hear that it is from, you know, when it's a very popular, when it's a positive case, but could you talk a little bit more about how these decisions are made?
The decision is made by editors-in-chief and associate editors.
Thank you so much. Very, very helpful. Okay, well, I see one more question for Alexandra. How many rounds of journal peer review did your paper go through? I think maybe if I'm interpreting this question, I'm wondering, did this process of getting all the feedback make your paper stronger from the perspective of going through review, or how did that go?
Yeah, so I think because our intention with getting this, with going through this preprint work in progress was really to build a project. I think that's really where a lot of the help came from, was, you know, knowing which direction to go and to take it. I think when it came to review, it went through a typical review process, like one round. We faced like the kind of feedback you expect from a peer review process. But I definitely think that had I not had this, you know, input from a lot of people that really steered me in directions that made, I think, this discovery even more interesting to a broader array of people, I definitely think it would probably not have been published. Yeah.
Thank you. So it's almost like the feedback really made the paper into what it is, even more so than just responding to the anticipated questions of reviewers. That's very cool. I have a question now for Vanessa from the BISO Motang. Just in general, what would a desk rejection look like for a platform such as PREreview? Does desk rejection factor into this process at PREreview?
So we don't host any preprints ourselves. We're not a preprint repository. We just host the pre-reviews, the preprint reviews. And then it would be up to the people who were reading the preprint and reading the reviews to decide on whether they want to use this research, whether they think this is good research or not, and they can look at the reviews to help decide that. We also have rapid pre-reviews, which we're looking to bring back in the coming months, which will provide a sort of quick overview and a quick way for people to be able to see what people's initial thoughts are of the preprint. So this, and one of the questions that it asks is whether people would then recommend this preprint to go on to be published in a journal, and people can say yes or no to that, which is not a perfect system, and obviously a full review is much more beneficial to people, but it can provide a quick way for people to be able to get a general feel of the research.
Got it. And so it's not as though there's editors who are making some sort of decision about how to allocate the peer review or the pre-review.
No.
Yeah, great. That's very helpful. Thank you. So I want to ask a question for the whole group, which is that, I think so many of you are working we've heard about the benefits from the perspective of an author, how journals are working to make people more comfortable with public review, pre-review, opening this up and really allowing people to participate, and Kleber about how you, support scientists in preprints and reviewing preprints. But my question for everyone is, what is it going to take, or what do people need in order to feel rewarded and supported in posting feedback publicly? What do we need to do in order to make this a more common activity for scholars?
I can go first. So at pre-review, we have, you can choose between an anonymous or a public persona when you post a review, because some people still have concerns about posting a review. It can be a vulnerable situation. So we want to give people the option to post anonymously. However, if they choose to post with a public one, then it will be assigned a DOI, which they then can add to their reviewer profiles, their CV. What we'd really like is to see in future a way to automate this so that you could be added to, say, your ORCID profile, and sort of raise the visibility of the work that people do when they conduct peer review, so that it becomes recognized as a piece of work in itself, rather than something that sort of goes on behind closed doors. And I think that's often something that people say, that they would like more credit for this quite large task that people do that's often unrewarded. So a way to make that more visible.
Yeah, thank you so much. Having that appear on your CV, ORCID is not quite a CV, but the idea of gathering all these data and displaying it, I think is wonderful. Yeah, would love to hear any other thoughts from anyone.
Well, I might have some. I did that. Well, to me, so I don't have the science here, the evidence to back me up, but from talking to a lot of people about preprints and arguing for open science in many places, I feel like in the end, for the people who are engaged right now are doing out of principle because they saw the benefits, and it's still a small community in that sense compared to the global scientific community. Now, when you talk to scientists who are not that into open science from first principles, and they are just saying, well, how this affects my job, then it comes down to rewards and costs, right? Because it takes time to review preprints, to post preprints. It's one more thing that you're doing, and you get nothing from it except the actual benefits. Like Alexandra said, my paper is better, but well, don't want to be too cynical, but that's not enough for most people. And then, to me, the cost thing is that in the messaging, we have to highlight that we are, as scientists, we're used to doing service for the community, right? We do peer review that's just closed. So I think we should start, the budget of time has to come from there. Like, you stop doing reviews closed for journals and start doing using some of that time to do reviews openly, or to journals that do it openly. And the other thing is rewarding. And then I can say as a funder that, funders have to start recognizing those. And the moment we value, like, well, someone is a reviewer for Nature, but also the moment that this is equivalent to, well, someone contributes a lot to review lots of reprints and papers openly, and that should count. To me, it should count more, but it should at least be the same in terms of reputation and value. That, I think, would go a long way towards making this more common.
Thank you. That's a great point. Any other comments? Alexandra, Eucidio.
Well, I believe it's to convince people more of the benefits of preprint, especially showing that the evaluation teaches us to write better, research better, and understand the value of sharing scientific production.
Thank you so much. I like that a lot of you are, I think this provides a good segue into another question that was asked by Sridhar Gautam. How do we popularize and populate preprint repositories? That on one level, we're over here having this conversation about conversations on preprints and, talking about these reviews, which are, rare, wonderful, but they're rare. And then in many disciplines, in many areas, preprints themselves are rare. So what do we all need to do in order to make preprints fit the needs of different communities? And yeah, what are your feelings as to how to make preprinting serve communities of scholars?
I don't think I've ever heard someone with a good strategy for popularizing preprints, right? In the fields where preprints are common, it's due to some historical accident, contingency, like, physicists have been using it forever, and the pandemic was a wound to preprints in the biological sciences. So I'm not sure there's a well-delineated strategy here.
I would say it's part of a bigger cultural shift that is slowly happening. That's slowly moving from publishing in sort of closed, high prestige journals to a lot more people publishing in open access journals, seeing more citations that way, but also just changing how we assess what is quality research. So it's not just necessarily citations, it's not necessarily altmetric scores, it's looking very broadly about how the research is used, who it's accessed by, who it's reviewed by, and just kind of changing, I guess, what we recognize in terms of rewarding people for their research and where they publish. And I think that shift is happening, but it's something that takes a long time. And I think it will get there. I think more people are posting preprints. We saw a big explosion of preprints during the pandemic, for example, because that was a really clear way to highlight the benefits of them. And I think things will continue to go that way in future. I think preprints are consistently growing in usage. We're seeing preprint reviews growing, and I think the benefits are clear to people. So I think, as soon as more funders and more publishers and more journals start to recognize this as well, I think the shift will just kind of naturally, hopefully, happen that way.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. All right, well, we have just a few minutes left in our 90-minute slot. And I want to just close with one final question for everyone. So this question comes from Luciano Panipucci again. I see lots of big journals where the author decides whether the decision report is going to get published or not, and then the reviewers decide whether they're going to sign their names. But in this world where we're moving into preprints, who should decide whether the preprint review is published and signed? So maybe let's do just a quick roundtable on that question. Who should decide whether a review on a preprint gets published?
So I think, as I was saying before on pre-review, we give people the option. The review is the option to either sign it themselves or they use a pseudonym. The pseudonym allows that it's still kind of linked to their ORCID profile, so they still there's still a DOI associated with it, but their name is not attached to it. And And the reasons that we have for that is because we want to protect authors' identities, but particularly because we're working with lots of early career researchers, people from marginalized backgrounds who want people to feel safe in reviewing. We do hope that most people post with a public profile, and this also means that they can get the recognition for that. They can, like I was saying before, they can add this DOI that will have their name as an author, and there's benefits for them to do that. But we still strongly believe that it should be a choice for the reviewer to choose whether to publicly sign it or not.
Yeah, I think I agree with Vanessa that I think that, you know, like at least what information is shared with the review should be the decision of like the reviewer. But I think, you know, as we talk about this more, I think there's a, you know, more of understanding of like what the benefit is of actually like seeing these reviews and how it adds like another dimension to, you know, like the paper that you're reading. And so the hope that kind of that together, you know, leads to allowing it to be an easier process of like deciding to share or not, you know.
Might I add a quick thing that I don't think that having restrictions on where the preprint is posted is a good move. It's like, to me, it seems like repeating the mistake of, you know, judging with the publication by the venue where it's published, which is what we do at journals. But I guess we shouldn't. And then, of course, this speaks to interoperability. And if you're building, you know, so if you have PREreview or if you have a metadata and all that stuff, it should be interoperable between communities and between preprint servers. This should be the minimum standard that they work together, and you can build on top of them. But other than that, I'd be, you know, I wouldn't limit anything about the service. You put your preprint wherever you think it's appropriate, and once it's there, we can view, we can interact with it, we can build upon. But
thank you. Please go ahead.
It's a difficult question to answer because it will depend a lot on the dynamics and organization for each journal's work. I think about the dynamics of every day. It depends on internal negotiation, discussion, the journal history, how the way it is organized. We, for example, adopted to the decision made by editor because we still have little demand. But in the future, we will need to resume the discussion when more reports are submitted for publication.
Well, thank you so much. I think the responses here are really indicating a lot of deep thinking about how to make people comfortable with this exciting and innovative new process. I want to thank once again all of our speakers for sharing their insights with us today. And I also want to thank SciELO and all of you for being a part of this conversation. I apologize. I know there are a few questions that we did not get to answer, but I hope we can continue having this conversation on some other venue. The recording will be available on the SciELO YouTube channel. So, you know, maybe we can use the comments there to continue the discussion. Slides are going to be available at the seminar page on 25.scielo.org. And just as a reminder, this event is a part of a series celebrating SciELO's 25th anniversary. I'm going to hand it over now to Alex from SciELO, who will share a little bit more about what's in store. Thanks again.